I'm going to admit.
Cool. Oh, at the beach. Okay, no problem. You're welcome to type in chat, kind of just like where you are and a little bit about your portfolio, but don't feel like you have to interrupt your beach trip. Okay, so today we're talking about Hickory, Asheville. Should be fun since both of you kind of said you're in Asheville proper. I can focus a little bit more there too. We'll talk about kind of the broad data. Um, I'm going to just take one little product break, and I won't do this until the end again. But small thing I want to let you guys know, I don't know if either of you are Wheelhouse users, but Wheelhouse is obviously a revenue management and dynamic pricing platform. We're really the platform selected by most of the larger enterprise clients, but we work with people from all levels. Thing I wanted to announce is all of our performance analytics are now free. So the market data I'm going to be showing you is freely available to anyone who just signs up with Wheelhouse, no cost. We also have a really great tool for your internal portfolio analytics where you can see pickup, look at market data, look at your historical data, and bring that all the way to a daily level. So kind of like a key data light that is really, really good for certain revenue management tasks. So quite a bit faster to use, although it may be a little less flexible than key data. But that is a free product. I'm probably not going to jump into it too much today. I may show you a little bit of market data pacing on it, but just a little thing there is if you're interested in kind of upping your game on some business intelligence, let us know and we're happy to, schedule some time and walk through that with you individually. Okay, so let's jump into the market data. Um, so the first thing I kind of like to do is uh, I'm going to use the Wheelhouse market data to kind of give us an idea of what's going on, but I like to do a little research and just kind of find out what else is going on and being said. I found a few different data sources that are kind of interesting that you guys might find interesting. I also like to use these because I feel like whenever you're talking to owners, it helps to have like third-party data sources, not just like your own and our industry's data sources to kind of talk to. Um, this first article, is just a brief article from the governor that North Carolina tourism in general continues to break records. 2024 was a record-breaking year, um, which is pretty interesting. This one doesn't break things down by region. However, I think the important thing here, for me, at least when I was looking at this, is it does give us an idea of the domestic versus international travel spend in North Carolina, which is pretty low, right? Um, Basically 1.2 billion out of 35 billion. So not a ton of international travelers coming to North Carolina in general. This is the Visit North Carolina website, which actually is super nice. The CVB in this area is really nice. I only bring this up because you can see that they've assigned this territory mountains, and that'll come up again in other reports. Um, and honestly, I was looking here, and there is, I'll show you in a minute, but the CVBs tend to actually drive business, and you guys have a really nice one. So they do lodging, something interesting if you're just unaware of it. But possibly getting onto these could be good because this is a very nice CVB DMA site. Um, this is just the statewide spending. This one I'm not going to bring up too much on here. I think the big thing to keep in mind here, so this is domestic and international travel in North Carolina. The only thing that caught my eye here is actually that the lodging receipts are fairly low proportion. They're not as high as I would expect. It's kind of indicating to me that lodging prices aren't always as high as like say, like it's beaten by food service here. Except for international. Still beaten by food service, but not as much. That kind of struck me a little bit that, travelers are spending as much on food as lodging, which in some ways makes sense, but sometimes I expect lodging to be a little higher. This one's not too important, so I'm going to skip it. You guys do have a very good regional visitor profile that has been done year over year. Again, the region we're talking about is going to be mountain, and there was a few good things in here. This is like kind of interesting. Let me actually hop over to this one. Oh, no. It's this one. There was, this. So this is telling us where people are coming from in the mountain region. So this is going to be 2024, obviously, but pretty up to date. They do say they do this or planning to do this on a yearly basis. And as you would expect, a lot of this is domestic. Let me grab my pen out. Where'd it go? So a lot of this is domestic in the direct region, right? Florida's a little far, Georgia, South Carolina. You're getting a pretty big domestic population coming, but actually this is smaller than other regions, which is pretty interesting. When we look at the coast, or where did that go? So this one's Piedmont, North Carolina, 32, but the coast is getting a bigger proportion of this. But about a third are coming from in-state. And this is the other interesting one. Most of these states are going to be pretty close, but you do get a pretty sizable contingent from California, New Jersey, Pennsylvania is fairly close, but that was kind of interesting to me, right? But you do have a pretty big slice of other US states coming over here, and I think the California one's the most interesting because that's going to be fly-in, right? This stuff you would already know. There was another piece I kind of wanted to share here. In the mountain region, hotel, motel, pretty big proportion of overall stays. That makes sense. Asheville has had a lot of hotel growth over the last, like, what, 10 years? I think it like more than doubled since maybe even 20 years. But I think it was 10. I have another thing. But you're competing pretty strongly with the hotel market here, potentially. And let's see, there was one more thing that was kind of interesting to me on this one. This advanced booking. You guys will know this. However, this advanced booking situation here, like Piedmont, is going to be much shorter than the coastal, right? The coastal has these bigger than a year, bigger than 6 months. Most of the stays are going to be here. Now, that might be partly driven by the hotel kind of business. You know, you have a city that's popular. People are going to book that shorter. You have a lot of people coming in from short, although that they are coming a little further, but they're still probably driving in. But you're basically looking at your primary booking windows being 3 months or less. And that's what this purple is. Things you'd probably know, definitely going to be driven by partially the hotel stays that this is tracking. However, the reason I show you stuff like this is these can be really interesting things to share with owners. One, because they're not just coming from you. They're coming from very reputable sources at the state. They're nice images, and they can help you kind of like drive a point home. If you're like, hey, you know, we're past the booking window. We really, you know, a lot of these stays are going to have come in at this time. We need to do this with the rate or whatever. It can help you make that case, and it's not just like your word when it comes to like the justification for it. This was a small thing, a little bit of basically this is a recent article from May, beginning of May. Asheville's hotel demand dropped a little bit after Helene. Interesting thing here is when you actually read this, they say that the hotel room drop isn't huge in terms of a percentage. It does break down in the article that that drop really seems to be kind of also the money drop. It's a drop in tax receipts. Really seems to be dropped partially by ADR. Vacation rentals have dropped quite a bit. However, they think that that's mostly due to vacation rentals coming off the market post-hurricane in the region. This final piece, I just want to show you, I'm not going to dig into this too much, but on the Asheville County Tourism Authority, they have this, they have these performance index. So if you click on this here, they have all these reports that are pretty up to date. We're all the way through May 2025. And when you click into that, it gives you this, what looks like the Smith Travel Research data for the region, which if you've ever used Smith Travel Research data, usually kind of expensive to just buy. And it seems like the CVB is giving you the highlights of that on a month-to-month basis. So that's pretty nice, right? especially if you're talking to owners, we're just trying to get an idea of what's going on because hotels are going to have honestly like better data sources than our space has to give you just high level concepts of what's going on. Important thing here, like you can see the 2025 year to date, hotel occupancy is down 9%. That's a pretty big drop in hotel occupancy. That's primarily due to demand. And because of that, ADR is also down 11%. That's the kind of thing when you double it up, you get to almost 20% down in RevPAR. That is building expectations for what's going on in the vacation rental industry because you're competing for travelers with the hotels as well if you're in that Asheville area. Um, Occupancy coming into March. So this is a little behind. This one's March. So let me think here. Okay, so they're a little behind. They posted this in May, but it looks like they're trailing slightly. So this is probably March year to date. Interestingly, too, they also have the AirDNA stuff. So you can see pretty similar data here. Down 6%, not quite as much. Quite a bit of reduction in demand and a larger reduction in ADR. For March, same kind of things here. Although you see this trend consistently, vacation rentals across the country tend to still be pushing rates and ADRs, even though they're experiencing pressure on occupancy. We'll talk about that a little bit when we go in. But overall, I think this is a pretty interesting data point that's freely accessible to you and is just another way for you to give highlights about what's going on when you're trying to make a case to an owner or to other members of your team. And frankly, Smith Travel Research data is expensive, so it's nice to have access to. I'll send you these links afterwards so you can access them if you need them. Let's go ahead and dive into the Wheelhouse data. Before I do that, I just wanted to ask you guys, what is your impression of what's going on in both your portfolios and the market?
Uh, I guess I would chime in. I see that demand is much lower this year versus last year. There's less occupancy, less travelers. Um, I found that vacancies are very high, especially on the midweek, and so a lot of our strategy has been to target that with longer lengths of stay. We've also been seeing a different type of traveler this year, partly related to that Hurricane Helene, people coming to the area to do work, whether it's like businesses booking out and staying, or we've also seen some displaced people booking as well. So it's just a very interesting year. Yeah.
Yeah, getting that kind of like long-term work business is probably kind of a boon when tourism drops off a little bit. Quick follow-up on that. In terms of like trying to get that longer stay business, what are you doing from a strategy perspective? Are you like offering discounts on the OTAs or promotions? Are you doing it primarily direct, or how are you kind of operationalizing trying to drive that longer stay?
We're doing it in a couple ways. We've done promotions on our direct channels. We've done length of stay pricing on our direct and other channels. Yeah.
Makes sense. And that's not something unusual. So I work with a number of clients in southern urban markets in particular, and the weekday occupancy drop this year seems pretty substantial across the board. In Nashville, substantially lower, which has never been super high, but has always, bolstered occupancy a bit. Even in markets that have been pretty strong, like Charleston or Savannah, you're seeing drops in weekday occupancy. Um, Not totally sure the cause. Business travel maybe is cutting back a little bit. We're seeing people go back to the office more rather than being able to travel during the week for work. A lot more companies have gone back to the office. Um, I think part of it, this one is a little harder to like, I'd have to do some research and it's going to be market by market. But there was a lot of hotels that started to get built right after COVID. They come online now and they're competing for that business much stronger than especially the vacation rental side usually. I know that's probably the case in like Nashville. They've consistently had new hotel growth. My guess is it's maybe partially the case in Nashville. I don't know if they restricted new hotels. I think they restricted, if I recall correctly, they had restricted like new vacation rental permits, but I don't know if they restricted hotels. Um, but not the
Yeah,
case
there
everywhere
was
because Charleston
hotel.
doesn't have it.
Were
Sorry.
yeah there. Oh no, I was just confirming that there were hotel restrictions within downtown proper. I believe for 5 years, and that
Hmm.
was lifted about 22, I believe, or that pause was over roughly around 2022.
Okay, so that makes sense. That's about the timeline to this year for those hotels to start opening that would have gotten permitted and built. Like 2 to 3 years. So that might be another reason why weekdays are under pressure, is there could be a growth in hotel rooms here. I don't think that this data showed us that. They're showing us hotel demand, but they're not showing us total supply. Um, Caitlin, how are things going in your portfolio? What are you seeing? What are you thinking about the market?
It's difficult for a proper judgment. We have always, so I have 10 vacation rentals. They're 1 bedroom, 1 bath condos. They're all in the same building in downtown Asheville. Because of our location and the amenities that we have, we do our best to compare ourselves to other properties in downtown proper. It's Yeah, we're seeing weekday drop as well. We aren't seeing too much long-term stay that I think Dean had mentioned he was trying to capture. Um,
I imagine the booking window is
it,
probably
it's,
pretty
it's
short on those too, right?
uh, yes and no. So we can fill up our last-minute bookings decently, but we have had more leads out for bookings. For folks that are super committed, that they want to come back same time next year, they will book for next year. We definitely saying, ADR, RevPAR, occupancy decrease, but when we're trying to compare ourselves to, because there's quite a bit of active listings that I am seeing on your website. So trying to get that narrowed down into downtown Asheville, and we're not looking at West Asheville or maybe even some of Dean's listings that he has, and then just doing some shopping and comparison. Even folks that are dropping their rates to less than $100 a night, they're still not getting bookings.
Yeah.
We can't drop that right low. I have owners that are only go so far in their understanding and their patience.
Yeah. Well, I will start here in this kind of broader Hickory area. I'll dive in a little bit more into a little tighter around Asheville, and then I'll show you how that can be done in our platform. But it definitely makes sense. And part of the reason to kind of show market data is hopefully like if you have access to seeing what your direct competitors are doing and also how the market's going, sometimes you just have to be able to make that case to the owners about what's going on, right? But going sub 100 is going to be pretty tough, I imagine, unless you can do it via like a long-term stay discount so that you're not like posting $100 unless they're like booking for a longer stay. Once getting into like lower seasons, that tends to be helpful. Usually people don't want to do it in a higher season. Um, but that makes sense. So let me dive into some Wheelhouse market data for you. Feel free to chime in if you have a question or a concern. I am on this market report tab in Wheelhouse. So if you go and sign up with Wheelhouse, we don't require any payment or anything to do so. You can actually access every market report in the country and in the world that we do pricing for free. So there's no cost associated with the market reports. You notice some of the highlights here. So this is a pretty big market area. This is a very broad market area, the way we're doing this, kind of looking at this. There's quite a few listings across the Smoky Mountains, Hickory, Asheville. And we are seeing kind of a drop in that. That makes sense. Hurricane Helene, that was kind of mentioned in this article as well, that vacation rental supply had dropped a little bit. And we're seeing that in our data. There are listings that are offline, right? Um, just as a small aside, this is a pretty broad market area. If you use the Wheelhouse pricing model, we're super local in terms of how we break that down further. But for these kind of free data options, we do bigger regions. Okay, so I'm going to hop over here to the Trends tab. And I'm going to look at adjusted occupancy. And I like to look at this just because it gives us a good overview of kind of what's going on in the market, right? So we have monthly occupancies year over year. I'm going to turn off 2026 and I'm going to turn off 2023 for now. We're also looking at the entirety of the market. So we're just looking at every single listing. I might filter that down later, but really I'm just trying to get an idea of what's going on here. And since it's June, we're almost halfway through the year now. We have quite a lot of historical data to go off and a little bit of future data. So in short, summer is going to be the high season across the entirety of the region. I imagine that's a little different in the city. In terms of like how strong spring and fall might be. That does kick off all the way out to here. So we see a strong October. And January, February, March, April, kind of a lower season. Now, this is a trend we've seen kind of consistently. Year started off pretty good. So in the Hickory region, January was up a little bit in occupancy. February maintained. That's actually pretty consistent across the Southeast. January started pretty good for most people. Now, it is a low season for most people, so not everyone would have seen that. But we did see occupancy increases, demand increases in January, kind of across the board. Almost every market I've looked at across the Southeast, Florida, Carolinas, Georgia, not so much Texas, but even a little bit there. Once we hit about March, though, and in some cases it's a little earlier in February, you start to see attrition in the occupancy position. So you can see we've consistently fallen short at the market level in occupancy pretty much the entirety of the fall. Now, some places saw a little bit of a recovery of that in April. Doesn't look like Easter's driving much business here, and the late Easter definitely had an effect on this spring time period. Doesn't look to be the case here. Looks like most of that revenue was just kind of missed. Now, some people saw a little bit of a recovery in May, particularly across Florida. We saw a pretty strong May, although I think that's primarily driven by people just abandoning their rate position, right? ADRs went a lot lower. People really tried to drive occupancy to make up for it, and there were a few events. It doesn't look like in the Hickory region that May really made up a lot of ground. In fact, it's still underwater year over year from an occupancy situation. Now, looking forward into June and July, I pulled up some market data, and I'll show you how to do this, but I'll give you the description first. So the real question here is, how is this pacing? When we look at June, we're a little less than 50% of what was on the books last year. So we're less than halfway to being where we were last year. To me, that just heuristically is a bad sign. Most markets, even if they book a lot in the short term, are going to book more, like they're going to book less than 50% in, or at most 50% within 30 days. When I pulled up the data for this in the system, and I'll show you how to do that, the market was at about 60% of what it had on the books. So last year at this time, it would have been at about 23% occupancy. So, or 28% occupancy. So the market is trailing in pace for June, pretty substantially, in fact. That maybe is visible in your portfolios. Obviously, you should check how you're pacing because that's going to change things. But my hunch here, and maybe you've seen this in the previous months, is you get within 30 days, and if the entire market is trailing that much, it means people are going to start panicking really fast, and they probably should. They're probably really far behind, and that's when you see rate positions start to really erode and get competitive. Now, in July, we're at about 13%. Compared to 59%, so maybe 25% of what was done at the market level. Last year, that was about at 20%, so 20% occupancy, so 7% behind, almost 50% behind July pace. So again, July is pacing a little bit behind, not quite as bad as June actually, but both of these summer months are pacing behind. June, I think, is a really big problem because we're within 30 days. Once you're within 30 days, you have really limited opportunity to adjust. You're going to see the market start to move in ways that you could be competitive now and very quickly become uncompetitive in price and not like where the price goes. July, we're a little further out, so you can kind of, you have some time to adjust. And because the market's pacing behind, you got to think like there are people who are going to realize they're pacing behind or are vacant, and they might start adjusting the price and really erode the price position in the market. So you do have some time to kind of pack occupancy on the books now. Caitlin, for you in a smaller portfolio, you got to be a little more careful because you obviously only have so much inventory to sell. Dean, for you, you're probably thinking like, what's the right amount that I can pace but still be comfortable with my last minute pace without giving too much on the ADR, right? Are you guys seeing, particularly you, Dean, because you've got some more listings, how are you pacing compared to last year?
Our pacing is down significantly, greater than 20%, I would say. And yeah, we really started to notice declines starting in May. We were doing actually pretty well January through April.
Mhm. Yeah. Noticing this in May is good. I mean, I think if you've started to make adjustments to try to mitigate this in your pace in May, it's probably much better. It's still a little tight for June. Ideally, you'd be able to notice it in March, April, but that's hard. We had all that news in the financial news and the news, and nobody can plan for that. And it just kind of like neuters bookings, basically. And that happened countrywide. Whenever there's like a big financial news shakeup, consumers stop spending. Bad timing for everyone with the summer market this year because it was like the time that happened. Everyone really needed to see the pace on a week-to-week basis consistently. Hard to know how much of that comes back once it leaves the news cycle. But good to know. One thing I have talked with people about and heard from clients in particularly parts of Florida who were under a lot of pressure this spring also. They've been under a lot of occupancy pressure on the panhandle. They have noticed that fall pacing is okay. So like you said, early pacing seems to be pretty good, but then there's like what people are calling the missing middle. That middle booking window seems a lot weaker this year, and people aren't sure why. Could be consumers, could be people are pricing too high. I think it's a mix of both. But some people are seeing that early price or that early pickup for fall be really strong and potentially a place to make up some revenue. Now, you guys have a pretty strong fall across Hickory, so you may not want to give up too much there, but something to consider that you might be able to drive some early occupancy there, or at least experiment. Like if you know you have to cut by the end, 30% or more here, try making little cuts here and see if you can drive occupancy ahead and try to pace ahead. Quick little aside, the way I was getting to these pacing values is I was using on this historical tab, which will show you some of this data at a daily level. There's these distribution charts at the bottom. And I was just using lead time distribution charts to figure out roughly where the roughly like what percentage of properties were booked by a certain time. So we find like at 60 days, we can see where this green line is. And just doing the little math. So that's how I was getting to the pacing. If you ever want to do that on your own on this, I'm going to close this because I think it's eating up my RAM. It keeps reloading. Okay. So next thing I kind of want to look at is I like to just check what's going on in the highest performing listings across the area, just to see if there's a difference in trend. So I'm going to filter down to the top. It's usually the top 15 to 20%, depending on how big the market is. And mainly here, I'm just looking to see what's going on in the market and see if it's pretty different. Now, these guys are at about 50% on the books. That's still behind. So June, pacing behind even in the top listings. So if you're looking, being like, man, market's pacing behind, well, all the top listings are also pacing behind. So there's not a mismatch there. Sometimes you see a mismatch where the top listings are taking the majority of the market share, but it seems like everyone's kind of suffering from pacing situations here, which also should be a warning. It means that last minute, people are going to be really adjusting their rate. July, 18% on the books. that's closer to pace, a little closer. I can't do the mental math in my head on that one, but this morning, but a little closer for July. And I think July is really where you're going to be able to make some changes. June is going to be tough. You really just got to watch it week to week and be willing to kind of go wherever the market needs you to go. All right, let me flip this back. There's one other thing I like to look at. So this is asking rates here. Asking rates are the average advertised rates that we're observing in the marketplace. So it's just a good high-level overview about how people are pricing in the market compared to where they were kind of pricing last year. And we're looking at the entirety of the portfolio, or the entirety of the market again. Interesting here, still pushing a little bit. You do see it come down pretty close to last year, so it's not pushing too high in terms of what people were advertising year over year. But this is probably the biggest concern for me, is we know there's a lot of pressure in the market. And at the market level, people are still pricing pretty high compared to last year. We saw that a little bit in the AirDNA data, where even though occupancy is under pressure, people are not acting or responding very conservative to that early enough at a market level. That seems pretty consistent across our industry. Honestly, there are some markets that aren't, and honestly, they tend to be in the best occupancy shape right now. There's a few in like Myrtle Beach that are like that, and even maybe down in Hilton Head a little, where people aren't pushing the rate as much, and their occupancy position's a little more stable. But this trend is something that kind of concerns me from a revenue management perspective. For you guys, it means that there's probably an opportunity here too. If the general market is constantly pricing higher, especially further out, we look forward to July and August, it means that you have the opportunity to undercut the market without actually like undercutting yourself, if that makes sense. And maybe making little price adjustments out here can really affect your pacing, because other people just aren't pricing, and you're really just stealing as much of the market share for who's looking as you can. June is a little bit of a concern. I would expect this rate to start falling quite a bit as people realize that they're vacant. It depends how sophisticated the market is, but even under as much pacing pressure as there are, the market is still priced too high, right? Now, if we look at the highest performing groups, thing to note here is even we're still seeing pacing issues in this highest performing group. The main thing is they're still pressing rate a little bit, but they're definitely not doing it as much. So those highest performing listings in the market over the last year, they're actually riding much closer to their historicals and have been across the board. They also, while they have premiums out here, at least until September, those premiums aren't as high. So it kind of gives you an indicator that they're looking out almost double, like, right? If we look at the market here, this is like where people are kind of paying attention, right? So we're already past May. They're really looking like 60 days out, maybe through July, but this all gets pretty high. It's like almost like they're not paying attention. In fact, I think July is kind of like that. So maybe they're really just starting to look 30 days in. Market's not really moving much in response to the occupancy. You can see in the highest performing listings, June and July, much more competitive. These are already a little lower, and they treat September a little different anyway. And then it's not until here that this just kind of consistently is stacked. So highest performing listings, still pacing behind. Looking out a little further, probably a little bit more that needs to be done in the market to get things where they need to go. Okay, let's just take a glance here at this kind of Asheville market set I made. So while I'm pulling this up, did you guys have any thoughts or questions on this kind of rate behavior that we're seeing at the market level? Nope. I'll move on. So this is going to be a Wheelhouse set. So Wheelhouse sets are they're partially paid, partially free. So this data here in aggregate, you do subscribe to, and you can turn it on and off when you want. You can change what data set is in it. If you go into our sets tool here and start the navigator, what this allows you to do is build a fully customized set. So you can basically build a market report for a custom group of listings and area. You can choose exactly what you want. There's quite a lot of free data on here. The map tool itself is free. And Caitlin, this could be good for you, especially while you're kind of exploring. You can use this to filter down into specific listings, and we do give quite a bit of detail on the listings themselves. So you can see here, every listing has basically a bunch of data points for the last 90 days, the last year, the next 90 days, the next year. And this data on this chart is all free. So whenever you're using the map, you can access this for free. Now, I can draw a thing, a little polygon, to filter down into very specific areas. And all of these filters apply. So if I just wanted to look at one bedrooms, I can now see all these in view. And if you wanted to, you could add them to a set and save them. And then when you subscribe it, you get access to this. So a lot of data here available to you if you wanted to kind of look at specific listings, or you were following them, or you needed to talk to owners about what's going on. What I've gone ahead and done here is I built a set. It's pretty large. This is a large set. I've got about 1,000 listings here. And you can see it's around Asheville, but I also included, like, you know, the area around it. However, most of the listings here, when we look at this, the majority are right here. These are pretty small numbers in comparison. So like this edge, this edge, this edge are pretty small. Majority of listings are right in the center. And what I'm going to do here, there's a few cool charts that you can look at. You can look at calendar data. You can look at metrics by month. But I'm actually just going to pull up the same trends graphs just to get an idea of what's going on in this set. So for you guys, the set is, the criteria I use for the set is that area around Asheville. It's listings that were open at least half of the year last year. So I filtered out listings that, you know, were hosts or just open a little bit. And I looked at listings that were at least 50% occupancy or more. I kind of want to get a better impression of what's going on kind of in listings that have a history of performing, that we can see are performing and kind of doing stuff, right? First thing to notice here is the seasonality is a little different across this set than when we looked at Hickory in general. It's a little bit flatter. The lows aren't quite as low. The spring is definitely a lot stronger, which is what I would expect out of an urban southern market. So a lot longer spring position. That remains pretty high until October, and the summer, while it peaks up a little bit, doesn't go too far above the spring. So it's a little less, it's a little flatter in terms of seasonality, mostly driven by the fact that spring is stronger, right? Trends here we see every year, and let me turn off 2026. The trends here we're seeing pretty similar, like lot more occupancy on the books in January. In fact, February remained pretty strong. Once we get into that kind of kick up, though, March, April, May, all attritioning, all quite a bit lower. And then when we look at this summer situation, I think we're seeing pretty similar pacing issues, right? We're not quite under 50% for June. So this set is pacing a little better for June than when we were just looking at total Hickory, but still pretty low on the books for June. Same with July. We're less than a third on the books for July. So those trends seem to bear out. Like they don't, you know, the main differences here is that compared to the total market, which is where total market is still pretty useful, spring's a little stronger in Asheville, but the trend of actually falling short appears pretty consistent. Looking at the asking rate situation, and I'll turn off next year. The interesting thing about this set is following a little closer to what like the high performance at the broader market was doing. You see a lot tighter rate positions across the spring. However, once we hit May, and May's already passed, May fell short, you see that rate position start to build up. And there's kind of a consistent optimism built into the rates, which to me just doesn't seem reflected in the occupancy data. It means that the market itself is still pricing too high. It means there's a lot of opportunity here. Probably not a lot of time to take advantage of that opportunity in June, maybe a little bit of time to take advantage of that opportunity in July. But August and on, you don't have to go all the way to where you were last year. You only have to find ways to take market share by undercutting your reasonable competitors. And so finding that could be pretty important. It could be a way to make up for some of the occupancy loss in the spring if you just pack on additional occupancy here at a good rate. A good way to do that in your own portfolios, Caitlin, if you're smaller, it's probably to find how many bookings are coming in last minute, or if you have properties that are consistently booking last minute, and use those properties to cut the rate a little further out and try to drive a higher price booking. If you have properties that are booking before you cut the rate, you don't make those changes there. And then obviously, Dean, you have a lot more properties, so you will use different pacing techniques. And if you want to share any of those, I'd love to hear like how you kind of watch your pacing and what you look at from a pacing perspective.
Yeah, we use a couple different tools. One of them is Key Data. We also have a database we use in-house to try and track trends as they develop. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Key Data is a great one. They don't show as much of the rate position stuff, which I think is pretty key because you can see where the pacing is, but it's also a little helpful to know just like, how much do you actually have to go down, right? Because you're only looking at your own data. And sometimes that's always the balance is like, where am I currently positioned? We know the market's positioned higher than it was last year, but you may not be already, right? In general, pretty interesting. Not too many differences here to the broader market area, though, which I think is good. It means that if you wanted to be easy, you could just use the broader market data if you're sharing this data. This is a good chart to share with people, this along with an occupancy chart with owners, because it tells the story pretty easily, right? You'd be like, hey, look, the market is really pricing high. Can we maybe cut here to try to drive some occupancy? Because I draw a lot on charts when I send them to owners and other managers. It's like, because look, occupancy is down. Like an owner can see that, I always like to ask them the question, do you think things are going to get better or worse? Because that helps prime them. If they say better, then yeah, okay, we'll hold the rate. If they say worse, the answer is usually pretty obvious. We need to make some changes to the revenue strategy. Okay. So that's, I think, mostly what I've got for you guys. Did you guys want to share anything, any thoughts come up, or do you think any concerns about what you see, anything come to mind?
I would be curious if you have any feedback on what Airbnb's change has done, the guest favorites, moving away from favoring superhost to favoring individual properties. I'm curious what kind of impact that's been having for your clients.
Yeah, it's a good point. So, favoring individual properties, I think, is way more beneficial for most larger managers because most larger managers can't maintain Superhost. It's like really hard, right? That I think is a big boon, especially if you have good quality inventory. It's probably going to harm the managers that have been like using their account to make up for the fact that maybe the properties aren't very high quality. And something pretty consistent across the board, across the country right now, is that lower to middle segment is really where the suffering is happening from an occupancy perspective. The high luxury stuff is doing fine in almost every market, right? It's the low budget stuff and also the middle stuff that kind of like just regular, like, oh, hey, bunch of people invested threw a bunch of furniture into a bunch of like modern kind of minimalist apartments. That stuff is really suffering because that's where the consumer drop is, right? Luxury is doing fine. And so the property side, from the manager perspective, probably helping them a lot because they're not going to get dinged on their account for having all these different properties. The end of the coin, you have to have good properties now because otherwise you're not going to be able to make up for the fact that your properties maybe like you have a middle of the road property that's getting pulled up by the account, right? The other big Airbnb change is the way that they're displaying pricing. That's affecting the entire industry and has been for almost 2 years now. So about October 2023 is when those changes started to be tested by Airbnb. About a year after that is when they really have like said this is the way it's going to be, so it's consistent. But that's affecting data for AirDNA, key data, Wheelhouse, Price Labs, beyond. Um, and it's something that like our industry is trying to kind of get a handle on, right? Is like now that the fees are hidden, how do we kind of see the difference? In the long term, I think it's much better for both the consumer and also for the data, because we see the total price that including everything that was charged, not just the rental. So there's a little bit of like difficulty in the short term, but in the long term, it means we know exactly what consumers are paying all in with these channel fees. It also means that property managers don't have to worry so much about like the fees they need for their GL codes, because it doesn't matter to the guests. You can actually break your revenue up however you need to. And that I think is a good thing. I don't think many people have adapted to it yet, though. Does that answer your question, Dean?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Caitlin, did you have anything that came to mind, or any other kind of questions that you want my opinion on or thoughts?
I don't think so. It was more of I was super intrigued by your polygon drawing on the map, and then kind of like diving into that, because that is our biggest struggle, because we do tend to, again, with the amenities that we have, we are a little bit more high-end luxury, kind of keeping in with what the area has.
Yep. This sets tool is really great. You can get into very specific geolocations. You can filter this down. We'll go just to one bedrooms. These are the like filters I used. So it's like, hey, I don't want to look at anything that was less than 60% occupancy last year. You can filter by amenities, things like that, just to get the list of listings. You can now see those. There's 35 right now. You can click into them. You can get this data. So you can always, this part is all free. You can always just kind of glance at this and see like, hey, asking rate on average there, over the next 90 days there, this listing is posting this price, right? You can get to the OTA if you want to, so you can view it. This listing looks to have, yeah, it's there. So nice.
Are you guys just pulling Airbnb data, or are we also pulling in any type of Vrbo data? Are you getting anything from the property management, like directly into property management software?
So good question.
Again, it's the skewing of the things, because you can post some things to Airbnb and they become super restrictive now on what you can do, even with integrations in. Vrbo, you just, you got to talk to it gently and you'll get there.
This contains Airbnb, Vrbo, and some Booking.com data. We do not bring our direct data into this platform. So when we were looking at the market reports here, this includes all of the direct reservation data we receive. And we have almost 300,000 listings now connected to Wheelhouse. So, we're probably as big as Key Data almost. This contains that, and that's why it's at a higher level of aggregate. We do not link that to this yet because we don't want to give away people's individual data, right? Kind of the same key data problem. So this is going to be our scrape data. Now we do make estimates about the revenue, and that is based off of our AI model that's trained on all the direct data we have over the last 10 years. So we are informing the metrics off of what we see in direct data for this region, but we don't share the exact direct data. We do have some plans to use this platform to give you access to like basically custom market reports, but we won't let you go down to the listing level if we do that. Does that help?
Okay, yeah, because that's one of my listings, and just seeing that, I know that the occupancy for the next 3 months is not 9%. So
this one is
why
this is the next year.
Yeah, that's the next year.
Yeah. This one is the 3 months.
Okay.
36%. And that's going to be unadjusted. So it's like, we have a few definitions. There's a couple different calculations for adjusted and unadjusted. You see it bumps up a little unadjusted. But you're right. These are the estimated ones. If you connected your account to us, we would not share your direct data on this platform. We would have it in the aggregates for this data.
In this, okay. Mm-hmm. But not
we don't
that.
give it here.
Okay.
Because people can go here. So we're using, you are right. The estimates aren't always going to be exactly right because it's binary. We're guessing. We're not like guessing. Like at an aggregate level, we know it's like pretty darn accurate. It's like 96% when we start grouping listings together. But when you have a calendar block date on an individual listing, we basically say, hey, if the probability is over X%, show it as decide it's a block or decide it's a booking, even though we know at an aggregate, it's like 75% chance of a booking or 35% chance that it's booked. Does that make sense? Kind of funny, like details. Availability data is pretty much always going to be exact on these. We get true availability data. It's determining whether something is blocked or booked. So this can be helpful. I tend to use this data in an aggregate to see like overall occupancies because I know the aggregate is going to be pretty correct. I also use it for the rate data because we're scraping the rates. We can see rate positions, and that can be really helpful for knowing how people are generally booking, right? The other thing I wanted to just briefly show you guys, I mentioned that performance analytics tool is free. This performance analytics tool looks like this. Essentially, we have a number of KPIs. Right now, I have this set to booked nights. You could set this to occupancy. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You have all of your listings, which you can filter down into custom groups, just look at certain bedroom counts, that kind of thing. And what it'll show you is at the daily level, it's going to show you how much you have occupied or booked for each day to stay over that day. And then it'll highlight the sales. So kind of like key data's view, Dean, you can see where you are on a daily basis. You could look at this weekly or monthly too. But that big piece is like that I think is really helpful for the revenue manager is highlighting the sales. Where are the sales coming in on those days? You have the same view available for same time last year. So you can see that pacing just at a glance. You can overlay a bunch of other data too, but I think if you're used to using key data, there's some use cases here that are really, really easy for you to do as a revenue manager. One of them is this year-over-year pacing. One of them is just quickly identifying where sales and vacancy are occurring. The other one is filtering down into groups of units. So you could say like, hey, I'm going to look at my 1 bedrooms in Asheville. I'm going to look at my 2 bedrooms in Hickory. That all loads pretty seamlessly by just filtering down into different groups of listings. So really cool platform. If you have any interest in exploring this, we do give this away for free. You too, Caitlin. We're also happy to meet with you and show you how to use it and talk to you about some of the use cases. We do have a full kind of revenue management education guide. This is pretty big. We're trying to provide a pretty comprehensive education tool for revenue management in general. So this isn't specific to our tool, although it does reference things, but we give you a pretty good kind of conceptual guide about revenue management. Also useful, Dean, if you're ever hiring someone else to kind of help you out. Same with you, Caitlin. As you grow, we're really trying to provide quite a bit of education to the space and give people the tools to be able to use these kind of more advanced business intelligence tools. So just a little reminder, like to show it. Tell your friends, it is free with Wheelhouse. All you have to do is connect your account and you can access it. Awesome. Any other questions for me?
I can't say that I have. Yeah, no, I really appreciate your time today showing us this and how other areas are also recovering as much as we are here in town.
Sorry, say that last bit again.
It's just how recovery is going and driving and getting the business back and thinking outside of the box.
Yep. And I think it's good for everyone to meet and kind of know what else people are going through. We've been doing this on a regional basis, really since the start of the year, and we'll circle back, probably around the fall time, to see how things are going. So I'd love to see you guys there, when we do that one again.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, John. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys' time.